A roamer over this whole world over.
And the therapist. We have mentioned several times, and we'll be mentioning over and over again, those 4 words. What upholds your existence?
As happy as me, you'll never see. Represent for the peaks. Represent for the streets.
Confrontation is, in my way of thinking, one of the basic essentials of living. We're born into a world where confrontation is the norm. And I never understood it because to me confrontation always was violence, hostility, vileness, threat, attack, assault. I didn't understand the purity of confrontation until I went to a facility called Daytop Village, which a lot of you have heard me speak about before. Daytop Village in Staten Island, New York, the now devastated Staten Island, New York, was a facility that housed 105 hardcore narcotics addicts, people who were considered the scum of society, convicted felons, including people who had committed every type of crime you could imagine. And I walked in on this scene to do some research for a movie I was working on dealing with things such as depression and addictions and crime, and got caught up in my own life. And I remember that first day that I was there, I left with a little sheet, and on the top of it, it had this credo, this Daytop credo. I am here because there is no refuge, finally, from myself. Those words alone echoed inside of my mind and my heart for weeks on end after that. Until I confront myself in the eyes and hearts of others, I am running. Until I suffer them to know my secrets, I have no safety from them. Afraid to be known, I can know neither myself nor any other. I will be alone. Where else but in our common ground can I find such a mirror? Here together I can at last appear clearly to myself, not as a giant of my dreams, nor the dwarf of my fears, but as a person, part of the whole, with my share in its purpose. In this ground I can take root and grow, not alone anymore as in death, but alive to myself and to others. When I say that credo changed my life, it certainly did. And the basis of it, as I was to learn in the ensuing weeks and months, was confrontation. Daytop mastered the art of confrontation. It had started on the West Coast at a facility called Synanon, where the whole idea of group therapy went from its bottom line infancy to a whole new art and science, which became known as reality therapy and counter therapy and confrontational therapy. They were one and the same. Up until then, as I've mentioned in other classes, group therapy existed only as a coffee clutch for psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers who would bring their clients together on a Saturday afternoon and watch them interacting and taking notes. That was what group therapy was really about until then. And then Synanon on the West Coast created this whole new science revolving around confronting human beings and human problems. And it was a tribal kind of situation. People would sit around in a circle, and mind you, of course, these people were all drug addicts, hardcore addicts, and felons, and they would confront one another. And the reason it was so effective was, for one thing, you couldn't hide from it because the person confronting you was someone you probably knew on the street. So you had Gold-Tooth Louie confronting Jake the Fake, and Jake the Fake couldn't hide from anything or pretend or come up with some clever lie because the chances are that Gold-Tooth Louie had invented the thing 30 years earlier. And it was a tribal unit in that These people had really never had family of their own, and this became a family. It was a house, and they called it a house, a family. And then Daytop did the same thing on the East Coast, and subsequently they became the grandfathers of modern-day therapy. All the self-help programs, the 12-step programs, and the rest followed suit. Only none of them ever achieved what Synanon and Daytop were able to do. They mastered the art of confrontation. Why there is no human alternative? History shows that civilization requires confrontation to balance and adjust the course of nations and humanity as a whole. Failure to confront leads to melees, corruption, and ultimate destruction. The destiny of ancient Greece and Rome stand out among many examples of this fate. More recently, Katrina and its effect upon the psyche of America bear out this non-confrontational jeopardy. When Mr. Bush flew over Katrina and looked down at the devastation and then left without actually landing and stepping foot there and moving among the people who were in great need of help, he was another great example of not confronting reality, confronting truth, or confronting himself. And what was worse, no one confronted George Bush about it. The press didn't confront him, the public didn't confront him. No one said, hey, Mr. President, it's down there, the people are down there. You should be walking among them, you should be there, letting them know that you're going to be there for them, that you're going to help them. Instead, he flew away conveniently. And that's basically the state of our society when it comes to confrontation. We have grown totally unwilling to confront things. Over the weeks, I've mentioned repeatedly and suggested that everyone go online and Google the 1968 presidential campaign issues. And you find lists from 25 to 50 to 75 to 100 issues that were being debated in 1968. If you take those lists today and go over them carefully, the first thing you will notice is that not one of those issues has been resolved. Not one single issue. They remain polarized. Second thing you would discover is that a majority of those issues, many of them, have been pushed all the way to the back or eliminated entirely. For instance, no list today of the top 100 issues covers prison reform. No one gives a damn about prison reform today. About 2 million people lying in prisons. 2.5. 2.5 now. Proportionally more than any other country in the world, including China. No one confronts these issues. We allow them to remain unresolved. And if we go back on the recent debates in this presidential campaign, you'll notice that issues were not covered there either. Everything was kept conveniently in the background, including the devastation in the New York, New Jersey area. Even that was not addressed. The greatest minds and achievers throughout history have been confronters. Christ, Galileo, Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, Tucker, and King, to name but a few. And of all of those, I think that Eleanor Roosevelt was perhaps the greatest confronter of the 20th century. In part because she was a woman and it was that much more difficult, especially in those days if you were married to a famous man like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The attitude of cabinet members and leaders, legislators, was, I wish they'd shut that woman up. Why does she keep babbling? Why does she keep coming up with ideas and thoughts and confronting people, including the President of the United States? But she did. She was a model, and I grew up in that period of time, and I thought of her as one of the finest human beings in the entire history of the world, because she confronted directly, sincerely, and consistently. Without the essential element of human confrontation, there is little hope for meaningful advancement in the human condition. We will not solve personal and interpersonal problems. Society will continue to back away from its challenges. There will be no resolution to our problems and conflicts, and everyone will lose, which is exactly what goes on. We do not confront ourselves. We do not confront our fellow human beings. We do not confront the corporations, the leaders. We don't confront anyone in a meaningful way. We duck from it entirely. Consequently, we've gotten into this malaise of just ignoring things, walking around with blinders on. We just won't do it. And of course, that trickles down to our own personal lives. We don't confront ourselves, confront family members, friends. We let it all slip by the wayside and don't bother to think of another way of doing things. Fear of confronting, fear of standing up for what we feel and believe in, because there's always risk. Looking bad is one risk. For instance, you go to a baseball game, football game, some major event, and usually before the event they play the Star-Spangled Banner and everyone's got to get up and put their hands on their heart. I wonder, out of a group of 35, 40,000 people at a baseball or football game, how many of those people don't want to stand up and sing the Star-Spangled Banner? I'm one of them. I don't want to sing the rockets bursting in air. I don't think it should be a national anthem. The virtue of the rockets. But how many people would be willing to confront society, confront baseball or football and say, I want to sit down? We wouldn't be. We'd be afraid, and for good reason. The police would quickly pick us up for agitating or some kind of civil disobedience and arrest us, throw us out of the stadium. Very few people are willing to stand up and face that kind of reality, that kind of looking bad image with everyone pointing the finger at you and saying, oh, you're a bad person, you're unpatriotic. Being politically correct seems to be a virtue in our day, to the point that we're afraid to even speak the truth about what we deeply believe in. During the 8 years of George Bush's presidency, I noticed that there were very few people, in spite of the fact that certainly there was a great opposition to him and his issues in politics, but very few people would speak directly to their feelings. Harry Belafonte, the famous singer, was one of the few. He called Bush a terrorist, a lunatic. A lot of people backed away from Harry Belafonte. No one supported anyone saying anything like that about the President of the United States. And my attitude was, why not? I publicly called him a psychotic and illiterate, which he is. What was wrong with that? If you believe something is the truth, what's wrong with expressing it? How can we be free human beings if we're afraid to express what we feel and believe? That's a central question to ask yourselves. How can we truly be free as individuals, as a nation, if we're afraid to say what we feel and what we believe? Standing alone, being isolated on shaky ground where you may be left in the lurch, yeah, that's often the case. I remember a couple of years back, I was in the post office, and it was not at a time of a holiday like Christmas where there was a lot of traffic. At least it shouldn't have been. But there were about 15 to 20 people waiting online with packages and letters to mail, stamps to buy. And there was one postal clerk working. And I know the post office. I know for a fact there are at least 4 postal clerks there at all times. And I also know for a fact that unfortunately they go on break pretty frequently. And people were waiting there, getting impatient, and I was getting impatient. I wanted to get back to work. And after about 15 to 20 minutes, I went over, there was a counter there with a little bell, and I banged on it, and a couple of minutes later someone came out and looked at And I walked over to him, I said, is it possible for you to get some other people out here to help? I've been waiting here for 20 minutes and it's, you know. And he looked at me and said, don't raise your voice. And I looked at him and said, I didn't raise my voice. I'm talking in a very normal way. I'm just asking you to get someone. Be careful, don't raise your voice. And I looked at him and I looked at everyone else. There were 15, 20 people in line. They were all frightened. You know, they were just as concerned as I was. They were waiting there just as long, and they were all, they didn't want to get involved. They were afraid. I wasn't the only one there who wanted to be helped, but they were afraid to say, yeah, he's right. Hey, get someone else out here, for God's sake. There are other people working. They wouldn't do it. I have another story that I tell about that, which is very meaningful to me personally, which some of you have heard before. I was in the movie Hook, Steven Spielberg's movie Hook. I was a pirate. It was great fun for 3 months being a pirate. I've done a lot of strange things in life, but that was the first and only time I've been a pirate. And we were all housed in this very, very large hangar, huge, huge hangar, 400 pirates. And this is where we lived, basically. And on a Steven Spielberg set, you often worked 14, 15, 18 hours. So that little piece of home is important to you. You keep your coffee mug there and your clothes and your musical instruments and whatever. I would normally get there about 4:30 in the morning for makeup and costuming. And I got there, got out of makeup, and I went to this hangar, and I noticed there was something strange. The whole door, all the doors were open, wide open. And I looked inside, and canvas had been strung across the entire length of this huge area. And I looked and I said, what's going on here? And suddenly, behind me, 3 pickup trucks slowly drove inside. And all of these pickup trucks had huge cans of paint, all with the clear markings of how toxic these things were. And I looked at the paint cans, and I looked at all these strips of canvas, and I looked at one of the drivers who got out of the pickup truck, and I walked over and I said, what's going on here? And he says, we've got to paint all this canvas. And I said, in here? He says, yeah, of course. And I said, you can't do that. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean I can't do it? I said, you can't do it. For one thing, it's against the fire laws. You know, they're all right on the wall over there. For another thing, you got 400 people living and working in here. That stuff is toxic. They're going to be breathing in those fumes. You can't do that. He looked at me as if to say, shut your damn stupid mouth. You know, the producer, Steven Spielberg's producer, has ordered this, and that's what we're going to do. And I said, you're not going to do it, because I'll call the fire marshal. I'll also call Screen Actors Guild and tell them that there's something, you know, very dangerous going on. And I know the union will support me, and I'm damn sure the fire marshal will support me. So he walked away, and a couple minutes later, the casting director, who I knew fairly well, good person, came over and took me aside and said, Nickolas, you can't do this. This is, you know. And I looked at it, I said, dear heart, I'm sorry, but I can't not do it. By this time, others began to trickle in now. And within about 10 or 15 minutes, there were 300 or 400 people in there. And everything was at a standstill. The drivers and the trucks were waiting in the background, waiting to hear from the producer, I'm sure. And I got up on a table and said, hey guys, let you in on what's going on. And I briefed them on what was happening with the trucks and the paint and the canvases. And I said, this is your show as well as mine. You know, I expect some support from you guys. And right, everyone started hiding. Of the 300, 400 people, 3 people, including my son, were willing to stand up with me and face the music from the producers and the casting director and these other people. The rest went into hiding, afraid of losing their jobs. There's another example of fear of confronting, fear of losing your job, fear of looking bad. I didn't get fired. The trucks pulled out. Canvases were taken down. And I walked on that set when shooting began, maybe 2 hours later. And Steven Spielberg looked at me and nodded, didn't say a bad word, no bad faces, nothing. You don't confront in the hope of getting a reward or expecting that's going to turn out well. I could have been fired. They could have decided to make an example out of me. But nonetheless, I did what was right, and that's why I had to confront them. And that's what's missing in our society today, in our lives today. Can lose money, position, respect, and end up wondering if it's worth it. I've seen people stand up for their rights and get burnt by it very badly. That's not unusual. Confronting and dealing with human relationships, loved ones, family members, close friends, acquaintances, and people you meet. The standard for our human relationships isn't too good. Friendships are supposed to include confrontation. If you care about someone, if you love them, there are going to be times when you're going to have to confront them about what they're doing in their lives, what they might be doing to you, to their families, children. What do? Just ignore it and again put on the blinders? Play it safe? What kind of a friendship is that? What kind of love is that? Those you frequently interact with, partners, associates, bosses, and co-workers. I'm in my office all week long, and lots of people who come to me talk about their bosses, their jobs, things that go on there, things they're challenged by, and discuss how hard it is to confront fellow workers and the bosses or management or owners. What kind of a working relationship can we have when we are afraid? People we deal with from time to time, shopkeepers, store personnel, postal clerks, whoever it might be. If we fail in all of these relationships to confront, what are we left with? Self-respect? Self-esteem? No. Organizations, corporations, landlords, insurance agencies, teachers, hospitals. The reason so many of these things are unresolved, all of these issues and problems, is because we don't confront them. How can we expect there to be any resolution? I'll give you one simple example, painful example. Every year in America, somewhere between 100 and 130,000 human beings die as a result of infections they get in hospitals. I had a personal friend of mine, a wonderful gentleman who was about 65 years old, who had water on his knee, and every 6-8 months he'd had to go in and get it drained. So he goes in on a Thursday. Sunday afternoon he was dead from a typical hospital infection. That's been going on in this country for decades and decades and has not been confronted. The matter of hygiene, planning, intelligence, we will not do it. Other countries have done it. A lot of countries like Denmark and Sweden and Finland had similar problems 15, 20 years ago. They decided to confront those issues and deal with them. Today, practically no deaths from hospital infections, whereas we continue to accept this. 100 to 130,000 people a year, innocent human beings, go to a hospital for one thing or another. They never come out alive. Civic and religious leaders, government officials, and other authority figures, they get away with murder day in and day out. Church leaders who ignore their responsibility. They accept the fact that tens of thousands of children are molested and raped every year and do nothing about it. Every now and then someone will raise their voice and there'll be an outcry, or some reporter will do an investigation of the thing, and then it goes by the wayside. Nothing changes. These people know they can get away with it. The tobacco industry is another good example. It took more than 60 years before we finally were able to confront these people in Senate hearings. Unfortunately, they were very well prepared for the hearings. Although they were found guilty of so many abuses and so many destructive and dangerous tactics to make people smoke and to deny the fact that it was dangerous to smoke and that it caused emphysema and lung cancer. And they were fined billions of dollars. And you know what? More people are smoking than ever before. More cigarettes are being sold than ever before. They got away with it, scot-free practically. They knew they would, because they knew they had billions in their kiddie funds and all the legal protection they needed to slowly do the end run and get away with it again and again and again, while the public stood by and did nothing about it, while the medical profession stood by and did nothing about it. Australia's done something very unusual. I don't know if you've heard about this, about smoking. Major breakthrough. By law now in Australia, every brand of cigarettes shows, the whole package shows some god-awful thing. Person dying of lung cancer. But I mean, the whole package is devoted to that. In other words, they cannot just get away with a little tiny warning somewhere. Of course, the tobacco industry is up in arms about it. Now, that happened about, I think, 5 or 6 months ago. The reports in the American press were like on page 28, all the way in the background. No further discussion about it. No one saying, hey, why don't we do this? Put that into law here, save some lives. No, they wouldn't do it. Society and the entire world in general, no one is exempt from confrontation. No one should be exempt from confrontation. But everyone seems to be. It trickles down to the ordinary human being on the street who refuses to confront. We refuse to confront basic things like driving. Another 40 to 45,000 human beings in our country every year die in accidents that could have been prevented. Driving today, I teach at Kirkland at a nursing home there on Wednesdays. And driving back, I witnessed one scene after the other of nasty drivers, horrid people who refused to signal, who refused to let anyone in, all with that cold look on their faces as if everyone out there is their enemy. A couple of years back, I was at the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, I think it's called. Living. My son's group was playing there that day, and they have 3 prayer sessions on Sundays, and they bring in quite a crowd. And on Sunday, they have maybe each session, they've got 2,000-3,000 people there. And the pastor that day was going on about responsibility to one another and love to one another and caring and sharing. And she looked around and said, would anyone like to voice any opinions? And I jumped up and she pulled back a little bit. She knew me from prior experience and wished she hadn't asked the question. And I said, yeah, I'd like to pose something. There are about a couple thousand people here now, and there must be about maybe 700-800 cars parked out outside, right? Most of you guys came by car, right? How about we all, here and now, since we're talking about love and caring and all those wonderful things, how about all of us who drive cars standing up and making a commitment to one another that when we leave here and get in our cars, we're going to act like courteous, civil, caring human beings. We're actually going to drive as if we knew what we were doing, the way we were supposedly taught, according to the way we should drive, signaling, letting people in when they have to get in, looking at them the way we're looking at each other here, as caring, loving people. How about that? You would think I had said the worst thing in the world. You'd think I'd called them a lot of dirty names. Everyone kind of looked around, and 2 or 3 people stood up, and the pastor quickly said, "That's a very good idea. Let's go on to someone else now." Fear. Basic things, life and death things, even that we can't address. Knowing if, when, and how to confront. Confrontation is not an attack. I'm not suggesting we go out and attack people or rage at people. Common sense and discernment should accompany everything we do along the lines of confrontation, expressing feelings, belief. Always side by side with expressing feelings and beliefs, common sense and discernment. We can do that. That's not the problem. That's not what we're afraid of. James Cagney, I think, said it perfectly. Most of you are too young to remember James Cagney, great motion picture actor and Broadway star in his earlier years. And Cagney was a consummate artist, truly a consummate artist. And he was often asked why he was so good, what he did, what was his technique, his methodology. And he always said the same thing. This is very simple. I do 3 things. I stand on my marks, I look the other guy in the eye, and I tell the truth. Pretty basic. No rocket science, no great psychology involved. Stand there, look at the guy, and tell the truth. What's wrong with that? Timeliness, patience, perseverance, follow-up, and respect have their place by all means. Again, common sense and discernment. We can learn to confront one another, confront people we care about and love, confront people we come into contact with in one form or another, one area of life or another. We can do it with timeliness, patience, perseverance, follow-up, respect. They all have their place. Again, it doesn't take rocket science to understand that much. Always look for and acknowledge the other person's perception. And that's an important and vital part of confrontation. If you're confronting someone on any issue for any reason, be fair. I recently said that if I had the opportunity to confront Mr. Obama about his lies, his pattern of compulsive lying, I would do everything in my power to be fair about that. If I turned to him and said, "You lied to the American public repeatedly about closing Guantanamo Bay. You made that promise, that commitment over 4 years ago. You still haven't closed Guantanamo Bay. That makes you a liar." And if he turned to me and said, "Well, there are extenuating circumstances which you don't seem to appreciate very much. There are political realities involved, national security situations, a lot of things which perhaps you don't understand or I have not voiced properly," I would hope that I'd be willing to look at his perception of the situation. Because often is the case, when we feel we're absolutely right about something, we're not taking into consideration the other person's way of seeing it. Truth of the matter is that we often forget things or change things. We look back on things that happened 20, 30 years before, and we don't recognize that we somehow might have elaborated or rewritten things. For instance, my brother and I were in conflict all of our lives, the time we were children. And if my brother were alive today and here, and we were to sit down together and write out a list of the real serious issues that we had throughout our lifetime, and then bring in some people to listen to us, and they were to talk with us individually and go over these conflict areas, what they would hear would be two totally different stories on every issue. To the point where people would say, how could that be possible? I mean, okay, little differences, but entirely different stories, different perceptions, different memories, different egos, different defenses. So as part of confrontation, we have to be open to the other person's perception of things. And even if we disagree with it, we have to give it the barest. We have to give it the barest. Another daytop saying, which taught me a lot. It would frequently confront me with some issue about my own personal behavior, and I'd get very defensive and start cursing and everything. And someone would look at me and say, Nickolas, would you give it the barest that what people are saying might have some validity? So always be willing to give it the barest when you're looking at someone else's perception of what's going on. Looking back on that scenario at the set of Hook, when those canvases were put up there and those men came in with the paint cans, had they been open to the confrontation and my attitudes and feelings, they might have said, look, you got to understand, this is probably the only place large enough, big enough where we can hang these strips. They're needed for the movie very badly. They've got to be painted, you know, and the producer doesn't want to put you guys out, you know. No, but this is this. But they didn't share that with us, of course. Had they, I would hope I would have been able to examine that perception of what was going on. But this is a vital link to being able to confront in a way that is not unfair or unjust. Bottom line is, at the very least, you can almost always agree to disagree. Another part of confrontation. You may not get anywhere with a confrontation. All things being equal, most people are going to be defensive, are going to deny, and get into their ego bag. So you may not go anywhere with it. You may end up with just agreeing to disagree and continue from that point on, which sometimes is the barest thing you can do, and it gives you time for further things to develop. And time sometimes can work in your favor that way. One of the reasons time is important is we really don't know absolutely for certain what another person is feeling or thinking when they're confronted. And sometimes we're so impatient we don't allow for the time in which that person might either come around or at least express their perception or point of view about something. We tend to be much too judgmental too quickly. I recall running a group one Saturday night. It was an open group. People would come from any part of the city and take part in it. And they were always told one of the basic ground rules was that everyone was a participant. There was no observer status for people. And this one night, 3 dudes walked in. You know, I think they wanted to play with the funnies. They did not participate. They were not really involved. I think they were just not only observing, but looking at us as if to say, well, ain't this quaint? These people are confronting problems in life and each other. At the very end of the group, we always had a little go around and said to everyone, what did you get out of the group? You know, are you going to come back? And we got to these 3 guys. They went, oh yeah, we got a lot out of it, sure, didn't we? You know? And one guy in particular was really almost offensive in his image of himself. Yeah, I really learned from you people tonight. You got my word of honor. I am going to come back. Of course, I never saw him again, but 6 months later, I'm in a cafeteria having lunch with someone, and I noticed that maybe 4 or 5 tables away is the same guy. And he's just kind of looking over, and about 20 minutes later, I finished lunch with my friends and got up to leave and started leaving, and this guy walked up to me. He says, can I talk to you for a minute? And I said, sure. He says, you probably don't remember me. I said, no, I remember you. You came to that group that Saturday night long ago. He said, yeah. And I said, boy, didn't he? And he said, well, this is hard for me to say, but I really was pretty bad that night. I behaved, like a fool. And when I said, oh yeah, I'm going to come back for sure, I knew I was lying. And I felt bad about it, very bad. And when I saw you here, I really got in touch with some very bad feelings about myself. I just want to tell you I'm sorry. So you never know what's going on with a person, which is another reason you should confront. Because though the person might be very defensive, immediately defensive, and deny everything, you don't know what he's thinking or feeling when he leaves, or how that might affect that individual a year later or 10 years later. That's another reason to confront. Do your thing simply because it's right and with no expectations either way. Do not confront with the idea of being rewarded or with some expectation of success, the person immediately changing or copying to something or agreeing with you. The bottom line is you do it because it's right. And if we fail to do things like that, then of course that weakens the structure of our entire life. We cannot look in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. And we certainly can't allow ourselves to believe that this is freedom, hiding from confrontation, putting on the blinders. Make it a lifestyle. Acknowledge your self-respect and consistently honor it. It should be an act as if, something you act as if you can do. And keep acting as if until it develops into a think as if and a feel as if and a do. It should be part of your lifestyle, as everything we're talking about in any of these classes is. None of this is meant as an intellectual or psychological or even spiritual examination or exercise. The whole idea is how to apply this. How do you apply the idea of confrontation in your life, which we're going to get to shortly? Be guided not by ego, but by what upholds existence. Now, those of you who've been with me for the weeks have heard me talk about what upholds existence pretty frequently. Those 4 words, what upholds your existence, are a concept that truly can change your life, drastically change your life, if you apply it. We don't know how to deal with decision-making and conflicts most often because the way in which we approach decisions or conflicts, issues, is one way or the other. It's either good or bad, right or wrong, yes or no, black or white. Same way we're either Republican or Democrat, or believe in capital punishment or don't believe in capital punishment, or believe in legalized marijuana laws or don't believe in it, or believe in women's equal rights or don't believe in it. We're polarized on every major issue there is, in part because we don't confront, in part because we don't change, we don't think about other people's perceptions, we don't think about progress moving ahead, so we stay in this rut. And our language is based on that. What am I going to do? When am I going to do it? Where will I do it? How will I do it? Yes or no again. One choice or the other. All polarized. As opposed to what upholds your existence. When you start relating to the uphold of existence, something happens to this wonderful gift called the mind-brain. It suddenly begins to charge itself in ways that you could not possibly imagine. It becomes alert, it becomes spontaneous, starts shooting out different channels and networks. And suddenly, instead of one or the other choice, you've got many choices, different approaches, different avenues. The mind begins to really spring into a different level, another level entirely. The imagination comes into play. It doesn't happen when you say, what should I do, or how should I do it, when should I do it, where should I do it? But something magical and wonderful happens when we ask ourselves, what upholds my existence? That language really begins to change our lives. Ego interferes with all of it, of course. Most of us don't understand ego or its destructive nature. We're also confused by ego and pride. They're not one and the same, although very often people speak of them as if they were one and the same. Pride in and of itself is a rather positive thing. It's an acknowledgement of things you've done, things you've accomplished. If I write a book, I've written 4 books, I've written 7 plays and numerous movies, I work hard on them. When I finish, I feel a sense of pride. I've accomplished something I started out to do. I feel good about myself. Hopefully I'm not going to take it too far and become vain and begin to think of myself as being, above other people. But that's not ego. Ego is entirely different. The definition of ego, which I've attached myself to over the decades, that which, when opposed, seeks to assert itself, is ego. That which, when opposed, seeks to assert itself, is ego. And the second part of that is, when the ego dissolves, we're capable of all qualities. I mention ego in this light because if you get into the practice, the habit of confronting people and issues and yourself, if you really confront, you're going to, of course, be met with ego. You're going to be met with defensiveness, denial, and ego, that triangle. So you've got to be prepared for it, you've got to be ready for it, and you've got to be willing to work through that with common sense and discernment, and not give up on the confrontation. This is a general structure of there is no human alternative to confrontation. It's not easy to do, I recognize that, but it is doable, and it is vital to existence. If you refuse to confront yourself and others and society, then you're part of the problem. I recall that Eldridge Cleaver said that in the 1960s. If you're not part of the resolution, you're part of the problem. And with confrontation, that's pretty much what it comes down to. Having said this, I'd like to hear from each person about their understanding and level of confrontation, how they see them, how you see yourself when it comes to confrontation, in terms of the kind of person you want to be, whether you want to confront or not. Just a general kind of idea of how this should affect your life and what you're going to do about it. And anyone can start.
I think I go back and forth between confronting and not. I think the biggest thing for me is confronting myself as to my intention for confronting others, to find out if it truly is something that I'm doing from my heart versus my ego. What's my intention and what's my expectation? Because often I think I go to confrontation with my ego and not my heart. So I need to start being more aware of that and bite my lip and and ask myself some questions before I open my mouth.
What you might do would be to reflect on that definition, that which when opposed seeks to assert itself as ego. Because if you see it in that light, you can catch yourself pretty quickly and say, yeah, this is what it is, ego, because what I'm doing is not really confronting in terms of a human value or something that I feel deeply, but rather a personal thing, and that's why I'm doing this. Yeah, catch yourself definitely that way.
I can see a lot of times sometimes, looking back.
Will you change it?
Will I? Yes. I've been working on that a long time. It gets
Okay.
better all the time.
Great. Somebody else? Anybody?
I am working on telling myself that if I don't confront appropriately, I have to own what's not changing. And so if I don't do anything about it, I can't complain about it. I need to accept it. And because I don't want to accept some of the things I don't confront, it's pushing me to confront. But I need a lot of work. So this, I'll just like paste it on my wall, because I'm not confrontational. And sometimes then now I'm over confrontational because I'm not confident and positively confident.
You're not confident. Do you mean you don't feel confident at that moment?
Yeah. Well, I feel confident because I wouldn't confront if I wasn't confident. But as soon as I come up against any, back conflict or anything, I would back away. So I
Why?
need to stay.
What makes you back away at that moment?
I would like to say I'm a big chicken, but
Fear?
yeah, fear.
So what you're basically talking about is emotionally based,
Mhm.
which is true of almost everything. Fear interferes with all the things we might otherwise want to do. And you mentioned confidence as well. So I might spend a moment talking about that. I've mentioned this before. Confidence, inspiration, motivation, those things in general, the things that are supposed to spur us on at a given moment, are not emotions. I want you to think about that for a minute. Confidence is not an emotion. There is no such emotion. Confidence, inspiration, motivation are places you arrive at, attitudes you develop based on your experience and knowledge, mind stuff. As an example, which I've shown, I've explained them many times, again, you're probably too young to remember Yul Brynner, the actor, although most of you probably have seen The King and I in one form or another. Brynner initiated the role on Broadway, and of course in the movie he won the Academy Award for it. Brynner performed in The King and I approximately 3,100 times over about a 35-year span. And toward the end of his career, he was interviewed on the Johnny Carson show, and Johnny turned to him and said, "You've been doing this so often, you could probably do it in your sleep, and you probably are so confident and relaxed, it's so simple, there's nothing to it." And Brynner looked at him and smiled and says, "Johnny, every one of those 3,100 performances, 20 minutes before that knock on the door, I go down to the bathroom and I vomit. That's how confident and relaxed I am." No. But after that knock on the door, when Brynner goes out into the wings and waits for the overture to start and gets ready to go on stage, even though the butterflies are there, the stage fright is there, the fear is there, he knows that he is confident. He knows he's going to walk out there and on cue perform and be great. So it is that knowledge, that awareness, that should guide you when you're frightened. Not the idea of waiting to feel motivated or inspired or confident, because that may never come. Most performing artists that I know, and whether it be in theater, singing, music, any performing arts, most people suffer terrible stage fright. Terrible, terrible stage fright. But they gain the confidence through their actions. So you should think of confidence as being an action. Inspiration, likewise, Konstantin Stanislavski, the father of modern American theater and modern world theater and acting, when asked by students about inspiration, and students would say, "How can I gain inspiration in order to do my work?" He said, "No, no, no, no. You must work in order to be inspired." So which comes first? You know you're going to be frightened when it comes to confronting people and situations, whether it's on the job, family, friend, on the street, wherever. You're not going to be relaxed and calm and not feel anything. You're going to feel anxious, tense, frightened. Doesn't matter. Absolutely doesn't matter. Don't use that as your defense excuse to not do what you can do. Because if you can finally eliminate that emotional ideal and go with what your mind knows is right, even if you're feeling that your mouth is dry and your knees are shaking and your gut is tight and you will become confident. And that's the way to go. This is true of anything we want to do. The same thing with, say, exercise. If you wait to feel motivated to exercise, you may never exercise. Wait to be inspired, you may never exercise. No. Emotions are feelings. They have no IQ. And here you have to use your mind, not your feelings. As much as I talk about the importance of expressing feelings, I don't know of anyone, do you know of anyone that people know me who talks more about expressing gut-level feelings? That's the whole basis of everything I teach, gut-level feelings. But we also must distinguish between the feelings and the thoughts. When to use your feelings, when to go with the thought, when to use your mind, when to use your gut. And when it comes to confronting, go up here. Go with what you believe in, what you really think are your values as a human being, not your fears. Don't let your fears direct you with that. Someone else, please.
I just had a thought, because I didn't know what I was going to say about this, but sometimes when I'm confronting, it comes out sideways, and I have every intention of, well, I have a feeling going on about whatever is happening, but when I confront it, it doesn't come out the way it's supposed to. There's anger and there's all kinds of other stuff attached to it. So it doesn't usually have a very good outcome.
Again, start with common sense and discernment. If you're going to confront and you know that your pattern is to do that, many people, by the way, dump unnecessarily. They don't start out with the intent of dumping on another person, but they feel angry, and they get flustered, and it comes out that way. And suddenly, before you know it, we're cursing, we're vile, we're threatening, we're hostile, and even violent. So you catch yourself and say, what's going on? What am I feeling? And what is it I'm confronting?
Right, I don't know if I do it the way you described right there, but yeah.
How would you do it then? Do it your way.
Yeah. Well, when I'm driving in my car, I'm seeing all these idiots just doing this stuff. I'm like, why did they go through that? They were supposed to go around it. I don't know what to do with that stuff that makes me mad. Not that I act out with it, but I'm just seeing all these things that, like, why don't they use their blinkers? They're doing that as a personal attack on me. Somehow I get it twisted, and it comes back. They're doing that to me. And then it does me no good because I end up getting upset, and they're long gone.
Right.
What
you should do is first recognize what the answer to your question is. Why are they doing it? I described earlier looking at all these faces, and everyone looks at you as if you're the enemy, right? Why? It could be your neighbor, your Could be even a family friend or someone you love without not knowing they're going to look at you as if you're, you know, the terror of the world. Why do they do it? The answer to that lies within our emotional memories. What we fail to understand is what is actually taking place when we're behind the wheel of a car and we begin to get impatient or angry. Someone is doing something. Is it really personal? No, it's not. It's not. What's happening is that person is responding to something that's happening to them at the moment, a sense awareness, and it's triggering off all those emotional memories by the trillions. And they're responding to that massive background without perceiving clearly. If all those people understood that, what's going on right now is all that baggage is emerging while I'm behind the wheel of a car, and it's not really these people are to blame or anyone else, and it's not personal, then they'd be able to stop and say, okay, I better check that out, you know, but it's not all these people here, they're just human beings behind the wheel of another car. So that might help you just understanding what really is going on with people in general. They're acting in the moment without recognizing that it's not what they should be doing. They should be getting in touch with what is really happening on a deeper level, all those submerged emotions from childhood on.
I guess we're all kind of operating.
Exactly, we're all operating on that level.
So to live in a world where all that stuff's going on and then to uphold your existence, whatever that is, you know, it can get rather challenging.
Absolutely, it is absolutely extremely challenging. If it were easy, we'd all be doing it, but nothing I talk about in any of these classes is easy, no, because we do not have a background of experience in doing that. We should have been taught all of these things, you know. The day we entered into kindergarten, they should have started teaching, not that it shouldn't have been taught at home, but everything begins to change when we go to school, because even if we lived in a perfect family environment, literally perfect, the minute we enter into a school, the leverage begins to shift gear. The family, the home, the values begins to be put aside. Our models are now within the structure of the educational system, the teachers, the system they're going by, fellow students, and the rest. And that's going to be affecting us. And it's going to hurt us very badly because we're not going to learn the things we're supposed to learn. We're not going to be taught confrontation. We're not going to be taught how to express feelings. We're not going to be taught how to problem solve. We're not going to be taught what feelings are. We're going to learn none of that. We're going to learn subjects, fragments, and we're not even going to have that explained to us in terms of how these things affect our lives and should be applied in an integrated way in our entire life. We're not going to hear any of that. In fact, we're going to be turned away from all of that, instructed to memorize and pass tests. That's going to be the order of the day. Just as with language, and language is very much a part of confrontation, how we go about doing it. We're not going to be taught what language is, and you've heard me say this a number of times. Instead of someone opening up our first English class or speech class or grammar class or punctuation class by saying, hey guys, what this is all about is communicating who we are, what we feel, what we believe, sharing that with other people, and, you know, building relationships. And that's what language is about. That's what all it's about. Although we got to pass some tests, but that's not really. I wish someone had told me that. I would have had such a ball then learning all these things. But no. Instead, I was forced to start dealing with things I had no understanding of. I remember in Spanish class, I had to learn how to conjugate a verb, conjugate these Spanish verbs. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, what the hell is this for? Makes no sense. I live in Spanish Harlem, Puerto Rican town. I want to know how to say hello. Teach me that. You know, teach me something I could use. I want you to go up to them and conjugate verbs. So we're not taught any of these things, unfortunately. So we've got all this backup homework to do. And it's not easy, absolutely. It's very difficult.
Well, that's why I think when you get to be middle-aged and older, you kind of land on your feet somehow, because you've been through all of it, and then pretty soon things don't seem to matter like they did when you were, well, I'll just say this is my experience. There's something that's happening as I get older it's finally starting to, it's finally starting to kind of
Kick
gel
in?
with me in a way of all the stuff I've been through, all the, all the different stages of my life and the difficulties, and it's sort of like then you finally just come out and it's like, phew, and it's still not over, but there is some sort of sense I'm making of things as I get older that I didn't have the advantage to do when I was young.
Keep going at it, keep going, and just keep bringing it all together.
It's just subtle.
All the subtleties, all the things. I might mention here what I've mentioned over the weeks, this thing about the human mosaic. You could picture this floor as a human mosaic, and each of you are the mosaic. Picture yourself on this floor. And we take a huge puzzle-making machine, stamping machine, and we bring it down, and then take it up, and then we look at the puzzle, you. And we end up with an enormous number of pieces. People are always looking at me and saying with sad eyes, couldn't there be fewer pieces, like maybe a couple hundred? Sorry, there are about 58 to 65,000 pieces make us up. Put in behavior and attitudes and emotion, sensuality, sexuality, creativity, intellect, and all the rest, and slice and dice all of that, and you end up with this massive number of pieces that make up the human being. And putting it together is what the challenge is, integrating all the forces of our life. And again, that wasn't taught in school.
Right.
They didn't stop and say, hey, the reason you're learning history is not to memorize when Napoleon was beaten at Waterloo. That's not what's important. The reason you're learning history is because it might reflect on your life today and how you might see the world and what it is and what the world has gone through and changed and what hasn't changed. And if they would have bothered to do that and then explain how all these things should be integrated, it would have made some sense, but they didn't do it. So now it's taken you all these years to slowly begin to make sense of it. Yeah. But be grateful, thankful that we're finally seeing it, that you're getting it together. Someone else, please.
Yeah, I can see how I have had a habit of not confronting, and choosing to change that, and that's impacted every area of my life: relationships, work. I would leave things unsaid if someone was digging at me, like, oh, there's a lot of bugs in the last release. Functional spec in the last release was really bad. It's like, what? It's the best thing we've ever had. What, But then I allow that person to go on saying that so that because they had an agenda. They wanted to become the lead the next release. So, but just, yeah, it's just ongoing. Oh, you know what you're talking about in my head, but you can't do that. You have to not allow someone to put out things that aren't true. Or at least put in your opinion, say, well, tell me more about that, because I'm seeing it this way. And what upholds your existence, again, is a key, again, just by having that out in front. It's very empowering, and also you can move forward in a way that is not, attacking us, even though there's a lot of anger or fear. So do the right thing, but you can do it in a way that you don't have to be right about it. You can say, this is what I'm seeing, and allow them to come in. So anyway, very good class.
Confrontation is responsible concern and love,
Yes.
in the truest sense. That's why you want to ask yourself what upholds existence. At that moment, rather than saying, should I or shouldn't I, That's typically what will happen. And most often you'll immediately get in touch with the fear or the reasons why you shouldn't. Fear of looking bad, fear of being alone, fear of being left in the lurch, losing a position, respect, whatever. Those things are going to weigh heavily and you're going to say, oh, walk away. Whereas if you ask yourself, what upholds my existence at this moment, you will sooner begin to see who you are and what your values are, and you'll take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm going to go from my mind into my mouth now. Because all too often we walk away from the confrontations we should be having and we run them in our minds, right? We ruminate about what we would have said. The scenario goes on and on and on, and we bug ourselves with it. We feel terrible, why didn't I? No, letting it remain in your mind does you no good. Get it into your mouth, get it into your gut, and use your mind only to discern what the approach will be. So that it's not an attack, but out of care and concern and even love. Those of you who have children, dear friends, certainly over the period of years you've had to confront out of love, right? You've had to say something because you love. To not say it, would that be love? No. As Thakur always said, love before you speak of love, and that includes confrontation. Someone else, please.
So I see that a lot of times it's imagined fear is why I don't confront. And so getting to the bottom line that the worst it's going to get is agreeing to disagree instead of imagining terrible things happening. It's about quieting the mind.
Yeah. By and large, using common sense and discernment, bad things will not happen. Much of that is our negative anticipation, where we create that mindset that, oh, I'm going to be fired, or oh, nobody's going to like me or respect me, they're going to put me down. Most often it doesn't happen that way. Among the many sayings at Daytop, which I've expressed previously, when you think you're looking bad, you're looking good. When you think you're looking good, you're looking bad. And very often by saying your piece, although you think people are disrespecting you and wondering, what the hell you're doing, you might very well be coming across to those people as someone who they can trust and respect and admire. So be aware that the negative anticipation is just another form of fear that prevents you from expressing what you feel and what you believe in, and go with that, really. And again, always the key is do it without expectation. Anytime you do something that's right with expectation that you're going to get something or something is you're going to lose sight of what's really important. And you'll end up doing, it's like people donating money to charities for the sake of getting their tax deduction, as opposed to doing it because you really care and you want to do it. Don't do it with expectation. Someone else? Only a few left, so.
I don't know how to articulate my question.
But try whatever way. It'll be fine.
Well, when you have issues about yourself you're trying to change, and areas you got to confront yourself about, and they're associated with learned behaviors from childhood and a family structure, and your pattern that you learned in your family structure works to your detriment. So in elements of where I was abused, I would try to please them more, which brought more abuse on me. Well, I'm patterning some of that in certain areas of my life, of where when I'm out amongst people, instead of cutting it off right now, I try to be nicer to people who are messing with me, until it gets to an eventual point of where it becomes a major confrontation. And it's like, how do you pattern where you stop it? How do you catch that moment where you know, hey, that's the line, instead of letting it proceed to a point of where it's a more difficult resolution?
Okay. Big, broad question, an excellent one. The answer is, first of all, every situation and every encounter between any person and another person is going to be different. So it's not going to be like there's one answer or 10 answers. There's 10 trillion answers.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to just get in touch with what you're feeling, first of all. And for some people that means a whole new lifestyle. Most Americans are not in touch with what they're feeling. We are emotionally crippled, unfortunately, by childhood and by everything else going on. So we have to learn to get in touch with what we're feeling. And then we have to stop and discern and say, okay, what's going on here? Is this guy dumping on me? Is he being abusive? You know? Or is that look on his face triggering all those childhood emotions that are still there and making me feel what I'm feeling? So it's a broad question of discernment and common sense, and training yourself to do it each and every time with each situation. And it generally takes several years to begin to kind of create a foundation for that, so that as things are happening, you get a clearer sense of what's taking place in the here and now and can be more responsive to what you feel and what you believe in. But it won't come easy, because you hit it on the nose, basically. You're talking about patterns that have, been built over a lifetime.
Foundational patterns.
Exactly. So you've got to slowly adjust that and change the foundation, replace it with a whole different set of patterns. Rules, beliefs, values, getting in touch with feelings, better language, being aware of what you say in your mind in all of these situations, and slowly beginning to create a new foundation. Easy not, no, but can be done. It takes approximately 2 years, from my experience, for people to actually make that turn, going from acting as if to thinking as if and feeling as if, and suddenly one day the foundation is there, and then it seems quite clear and a lot easier. But about 2 years of work on it, and you'll see it building and building and getting easier and easier.
For me, I have in my learning to change different behaviors, I'm realizing to choose different beliefs instead of things that have just been taught to me. I find that I discover new ones all the time as I go through this process. And I'm still doing that. I continue to find new ones. But and my process is, when I come to something where a new perception and beliefs, like all the different things that you've taught in your different classes, have given me much food for thought. When I come to a new understanding for myself, so this new knowing comes way before the behavioral change, because I'm still in that automatic behavioral, automatic habit reaction, and that takes a while.
Yeah. And each of them, again, will be different. And until you form the foundation, a broad foundation, it's going to be hit and miss. Experimenting almost every time you're doing it, trying to figure it out. The key to it, what I urge people to do, is to use the basic tool for change and learning, which is the act as if. To be very redundant, and it's worth being redundant every time I mention it, because it is the golden tool for learning and change. Everything we experience in life, from the time we're born, develops into a pattern as a result of forming habits. We have experiences, we're told one thing or the other, we see people doing it one way or the other, we develop these habits. All too often the habits are the wrong ones, formed for the wrong reasons, and we don't realize what the actual tool is that's being applied, negatively or positively. So I go back to that scene in East Quogue, Long Island. Nan and I are in the kitchen with our 10-month-old son who's holding on to my wife's apron, and he lets go and he takes his first steps. And of course, we look and we're amazed. Our child is finally walking. Wow. And then he falters and tries, and then he falls down and crawls back to Nan. And now, what was our son doing? He was mimicking what he saw adults do for 10 months. This thing called walking. And it isn't in his mind. It's not like I'm supposed to learn how to walk. He's only copying what he sees. So he starts to act as if he can walk. It's an act as if. As he goes through the days and the motions, acting as if he is a walker, he begins to experiment, begins to climb up stairs, hold on to things, go under tables and chairs, play games with the whole idea. But he's still acting as if. At a certain point, and with each child, with each human being, it's going to be different. Timing is going to be different. At a certain point, one morning he's going to get up, and instead of going down on all fours, his mind is going to kick in. He's going to, oh, I walk now. I don't have to, I can, and he's going to start thinking as if he's a walker. Transition. And he's going to keep doing that over a period of time, and suddenly one day he will automatically walk. He doesn't have to act as if or think as if he has become a walker. That is the way in which we learn everything, positively or negatively. It works both ways. I shared with you a couple of weeks ago my act as if I could smoke. I remember that first cigarette as if it was right now in the hallway of our apartment on Avenue M in Brooklyn. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I remember unwrapping that pack of cigarettes the first time and trying to copy how people knock the cigarette, one cigarette out, and taking it and then nervously lighting the match and copying my father going, and I thought I would die. I could not, as much as I had seen my father convulsing for years and suffering from the smoke, I could not understand how painful it really was until I took that first puff. And I remember just choking. And yet I looked at this thing and went back to it again, acting as if I'm a smoker. And it only took a couple of weeks to begin to think like one, and now I'm with other smokers, all this stuff. And then of course you become a smoker. Act as if, think as if, feel as if, become. Negative or positive. But that's the way in which we learn. Learn to drive a car. When you first learned to drive a car, it was an act as if. You didn't know how to drive a car until you actually experienced driving a car on your own. You're not a driver. When I'm going to Newfoundland, I inherited this beautiful Morris Minor sedan. I didn't know how to drive, so I took 4 lessons, took the test, failed miserably. I wasn't a driver. Took 6 more lessons, took the test again and barely passed. And now I get this card saying I'm a licensed driver. Am I a driver? Hell no. I remember the first time I got in that car by myself with that license, I almost ran off the road and killed myself. I got terrified suddenly. I saw cars coming at me. It took months of learning to drive before I began to think like a driver. And many months before I felt, I'm a driver now. And I'm a driver for the rest of my life. That's the way. And it's easy to think of it that way, rather than use some psychological, language. Don't make it rocket science. The actor learns to portray a character by acting as if he is that person, and then in rehearsal, slowly beginning to think like that character, and gradually begin to feel like him, actually walk around in his shoes, identify with that character. And if he's done all of his work when the curtain opens on opening night, he is that character. It's an act as if. Think of it that way. Use that language. It works. And recognize that you must not compare yourself and your act as if with anyone else's. That's deadly. Your way of learning, your way of timeliness and going into transition from the acting to thinking to feeling and being is going to be different than everyone else's. Like I described weeks ago about on the set of Hook, which I mentioned earlier. Most good actors want to do a scene in 2 takes the most, 3 the worst, because they don't want to have a reputation of being, you know, slow at lines. They don't want producers to be angry at them. They want to work with producers who are going to remember them as good, smart actors. And every time you have to roll the cameras again, it's more money, more time, more energy, and producers don't like that. So here we have 7-time Academy Award nominee Dustin Hoffman, more nominations, more Academy Awards than any other actor in history, got 4 words to speak. How many takes does it take? Dustin Hoffman? Those of you who don't know, if they want to take a guess, how many takes? 4 words for Dustin Hoffman, this great, marvelous actor. 30, 35 takes. Doesn't know what he's doing in the early part of it. He gets totally lost. Does he compare himself with anyone else? Absolutely not. He just says, roll again, Stephen, that's all, and keeps going. So don't compare yourself when you are changing or learning or revising something in your life. Don't point the finger at yourself. Go ahead and do it according to who you are, and that's great. Act as if, write out your acts as if in all areas of your life, including confrontation. Who do you have to confront? What situations must you confront? Yourself, family members, loved ones, people you work with, friends, acquaintances, people you come into contact with. Put it all down. Remind yourself. And then follow what upholds your existence, and you will get there. You will get there.
From God's on board, each day I die. From the Bering Straits to Palestine, this spring, this brook will ring the bell. No need of wealth, you're in God's hotel. Rover, rover, this whole world over, happy as me, you'll never see. Represent for the world. Rover, rover, this whole world over, happy as me, you'll never see. One should know, though, was Christ's motto, so do the same. Let heaven flow. No pills, no bills.